The planet was unlike any Elliot had ever seen. As the ship touched down on the surface, a strange feeling washed over him. This was the first time humanity had set foot on Zothar, a world where no other human had ever traveled. The air felt thick, not in a physical way, but as if it was filled with something Elliot couldn't quite name. The Zathari people, with their pale, almost translucent skin and piercing eyes, stood watching the humans from a distance. Their leader, a tall alien woman named Vena, was standing at the forefront, her eyes locked onto Elliot's for just a moment. It was an unsettling gaze. She wasn't unfriendly, but she wasn't welcoming either. Elliot's team shuffled behind him, their boots kicking up soft clouds of dust as they made their way toward Vina and her people. The Zathari never seemed to move, never seemed to breathe the same way humans did. They were statues in motion. Elliot felt an instinctual need to stand tall, to prove to them that humans could be equal, that they were worthy of trust. Vena stepped forward as they reached her. She was taller than any human woman Elliot had ever met, and her face was beautifully alien, sharp angles, luminous eyes, skin the color of moonlight. She spoke to Elliot in a language that hummed deep within him, the words, almost music. But Elliot, of course, had no idea what she was saying. A Zathari translator quickly stepped in, repeating her words in perfect English.
"Welcome to Zothar, humans. We greet you with respect, though we remain cautious."
Elliot nodded, trying to ignore the way his heart was racing. The translator spoke as though it had no emotion, just translating the alien words into neutral tones. But Vena's eyes held something more, something deeper. For a moment, all the humans and Zathari stood silently. There was no handshake, no overture of peace. The weight of the silence stretched long, and Elliot couldn't help but notice how Vena watched him, as if she were waiting, as if she were studying him. His hands felt clammy. His nerves were at the edge of breaking, but Elliot knew he had to say something. His team needed to make a good impression, and he was the one they trusted to speak for them. "Thank you for your hospitality," Elliot said, his voice breaking slightly. He cleared his throat and tried again. I just wanted to say that we come in peace." The translator repeated his words, but Vena didn't break her gaze. She was still looking at him, her eyes never leaving his. Elliot felt a strange warmth spread through him as her stare held him, but he also couldn't help but feel something else, something unfamiliar. There was a pull in her presence, a gravity he couldn't explain. The quiet stretched on for too long. Elliot felt himself slipping into an uncomfortable silence. And then, without really thinking about it, the words slipped out of his mouth. "You're beautiful." The words were soft, almost a whisper. Elliot immediately regretted them. His face turned red, and he shifted his weight nervously. He hadn't meant to say that, but it was too late. The air seemed to freeze. It was as if time itself had stopped. The Zathari, who had been standing so still before, seemed to stiffen. Vena's face, which had been calm and unreadable, slowly began to change. For the briefest second, Elliot thought he saw something flash in her eyes. Something not just alien, but almost human. Vena froze in place, her body no longer moving, her expression completely unreadable. The air around them felt colder, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees in an instant. Elliot's heart was pounding now, and he wished for a moment that he could take back the words. The silence that followed was agonizing. The other Zathari looked at each other, their expressions unreadable. Elliot's team shifted uneasily behind him. He could feel the tension thicken the air. It felt as though everyone on the planet was holding their breath, waiting for something, anything, to break the spell that had been cast by his words. Elliot opened his mouth to apologize, to explain that he hadn't meant anything strange by it, but no words came. The more he thought about it, the more he realized how ridiculous he must sound. He had no idea how Zathari viewed beauty, or if they even had a concept of it. Was he offending her by saying something so personal? Or had he overstepped a boundary he hadn't even known existed? A deep voice broke through the silence. But it wasn't Vena's. It was the translator speaking quickly. Apologies, human. Our leader is processing your words. She is not accustomed to such directness. Elliot stood frozen, unsure how to respond. The silence grew heavier, and it felt as though Vena's gaze was still upon him, still searching. The longer the pause stretched, the more Elliot's uncertainty grew. What did he do wrong? What had he triggered? The translator's voice softened again. Please give her a moment. Elliot nodded slowly, though it was hard to make any sense of the situation. His chest tightened, and he could feel the sweat building on the back of his neck. He wasn't sure if he was supposed to speak again, or just wait. After what felt like an eternity, Vena's eyes finally moved. Her head tilted slightly, and her expression shifted, though Elliot couldn't place it. Was it confusion? Curiosity? Elliot didn't know. But the words that followed would change everything. Would you say that? Vena's voice for the first time was different. It was quieter, softer. There was something in it, an emotion Elliot couldn't quite interpret. I don't know, Elliot said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. It just came out. I'm sorry if I've made you uncomfortable. There was a long pause, and then Vena did something unexpected. She smiled. Just slightly, but it was there. A flicker of warmth in the midst of her alien features. And for the first time, Elliot felt like maybe he hadn't completely ruined everything. As Vena slowly spoke again, Elliot realized something. She wasn't just the leader of her people. She was someone who had, perhaps, never been complimented in this way before. Someone who had never been seen like this, truly seen for who she was. And for a brief moment, Elliot wondered if this simple, unintended gesture had somehow begun to bridge a gap that had never before seemed possible. The next few moments were a blur for Elliot. He stood there, his mouth slightly open, unsure of what to say next. He couldn't stop thinking about the moment when he'd spoken to Vena. He never expected her to freeze like that, and he certainly hadn't anticipated her reaction to his words. Elliot could feel his heart still pounding in his chest, and the quiet that followed felt unbearable. The Zathari around him were silent, their gazes fixed on Vena. There was no movement except for the subtle rustling of their clothes as the alien wind blew gently across the landscape. Elliot felt completely out of place, like an outsider, unsure of how to navigate this situation. He had come here with a simple goal: to represent humanity and build peaceful relations with the Zathari. But now, with Vena's reaction, he felt that everything was on the verge of falling apart. The translator was the first to speak again, its voice soft and calm. Our leader has taken your words into consideration. She is processing them. Elliot nodded, not entirely sure what that meant. Was Vena upset? Was she just confused? Or had he said something that had left her so lost in thought that she couldn't even speak? The lack of response from her only added to the confusion. I didn't mean anything wrong, Elliot said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. I was just trying to make her feel welcomed. He glanced at the translator, hoping it would somehow convey his sincerity. The translator, though emotionless in tone, repeated Elliot's words to Vena. There was a long silence after that, a silence so thick that it felt as though it could smother him. Elliot felt like the air had become too heavy to breathe. He swallowed hard and tried to keep his composure. He had to stay calm, but inside his mind was racing. Vena had never been this quiet. She had always been poised and collected, her stoic nature making it difficult for anyone to understand her thoughts or feelings. But Elliot couldn't help but feel that something had changed between them. Something had shifted the moment those words left his mouth. He could still remember the way she looked at him, the way her gaze lingered for just a second too long, and the way she seemed to freeze, as if she didn't know how to process what had been said. Elliot wanted to fix the situation, to make things right. But what could he do? He couldn't take back the words. He couldn't undo the awkwardness that had settled in. So he stood there, waiting, hoping for something to change. Vina finally moved, her eyes turning slightly toward the horizon as if she were looking for something beyond the distant mountains. She seemed lost in thought, her usual confident demeanor replaced by something more uncertain. Elliot watched her closely, trying to understand what was going on in her mind. He wanted to approach her, to say something that might ease the tension, but he didn't know what to say. He had no idea what to do now. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Vina spoke. Her voice was softer than before, almost hesitant. "Why did you say that?" she asked, the words carrying a weight Elliot couldn't ignore. He blinked, surprised by the question. He had never considered why he'd said it in the first place. It had just come out, like a reflex. But now that Vina asked, he found himself struggling to put the feelings into words. I don't know," he admitted, his voice quiet. "It just seemed right in the moment." He paused, trying to gather his thoughts.
I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I just
Wanted to say something nice, something that would show that I see ya. I see you for who you are, not just as a leader, but as a person. Vina didn't respond right away. She seemed to be weighing his words carefully, her eyes narrowing as if she were trying to understand the complexity of what he had said. Elliot could tell that the Zathari leader was deep in thought, processing his words in a way he could never fully comprehend. After a long pause, Vina spoke again. "You humans, you speak in ways we do not understand. Your words are direct, sometimes too direct. But there is something in your tone, something in the way you speak. It is not just the words, it is the intention behind them." Elliot felt a small sense of relief. It seemed like Vina wasn't angry, but she was still confused. Maybe she wasn't used to such directness from outsiders, especially not a human. He had read about alien cultures and their various customs, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Nothing had prepared him for how deeply Vina would react to something as simple as a compliment. "I didn't mean to confuse you," Elliot said, taking a step forward. He was careful not to invade her personal space, but wanted to show that he was still here, still trying to understand. "I just wanted to be honest with you. I think you're beautiful, and I thought you should know that. It's not just about the way you look. It's about everything, the way you lead your people, the way you carry yourself with such strength." Vina's eyes flickered at his words, and for a moment, Elliot thought he had said something wrong again. But then, to his surprise, Vina's lips curled into the faintest smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make Elliot's heart skip a beat. "You are strange, human," she said, her voice still soft but now carrying a hint of something else, a small spark of amusement. "But I am beginning to understand you." Elliot's chest tightened, and for the first time since landing on Zathar, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this wasn't the disaster he had thought it was. Maybe Vina wasn't completely shut off from him, from humanity. Perhaps there was a chance for them to connect, after all. "Maybe," Elliot said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "We're not so different after all." Vina's smile grew just a little, though it was still reserved. She looked at him, her gaze softening. "Perhaps. But there is much you do not yet understand about us human, and there is much we do not understand about you." Elliot nodded, feeling the weight of her words. This was only the beginning. There was so much more to learn, so much more to discover about each other. But for now, for this brief moment, he felt a sense of connection. Fragile, but real. As the wind shifted again, carrying the scent of the alien flowers that grew on Zathar, Elliot realized that this moment had changed something. It had opened a door, just a crack, between him and Vina. And perhaps, in time, that door would open wider. But for now, all he could do was stand there, in the silence, and hope that whatever happened next would be something that neither of them could have predicted. The days that followed felt different for both Elliot and Vena after their conversation. Things hadn't immediately returned to normal, but there was a subtle shift in the air. Elliot couldn't quite explain it, but the tension that had previously hung over their interactions seemed to lessen. There was still uncertainty, still that feeling of being on unfamiliar ground, but there was also a strange sense of connection. A bridge had been built, not fully, but enough for Elliot to feel that the distance between them had closed just a little. Vena still remained distant, as the leader of her people should be, but there were moments when her eyes would linger on Elliot a little longer than usual. Moments when the silence between them would feel less uncomfortable. The way she carried herself was the same, authoritative, composed. But there was something softer in her gaze, something that told Elliot she was still thinking about their conversation, still processing his words. Elliot, for his part, couldn't stop thinking about her. Every time he looked at her, he found himself wondering about the things she hadn't said, the things she had only hinted at. There was so much more to Vena than he could ever understand, but he was determined to find out. For the first time in a long while, Elliot felt a pull toward someone, a desire to truly understand them, not just as a representative of their people, but as a person. Someone who, like him, had fears, hopes, and dreams. If only he could discover them. One evening, after the work of the day was done, Elliot wandered the Scifi city. It was an eerie place, quiet and still, as if frozen in time. The buildings were tall and sleek, made of materials Elliot couldn't quite identify, their surfaces smooth and gleaming under the twin moons of Zathar. The streets were lined with plants that seemed to glow faintly, casting a soft light on everything around them. There was no hustle and bustle here, no busy markets or loud conversations. The Zathari were a quiet people, and their city reflected that. But Elliot found something oddly peaceful about it. As he walked, he came across a small, secluded garden. The flowers here were unlike anything he had ever seen before, their petals shimmering with colors that seemed to change with every movement. The air was sweet with their scent, and the soft glow of the plants bathed the garden in an ethereal light. It was beautiful, surreal, and for a moment, Elliot forgot about everything else. He forgot about the pressure of his mission, the weight of his position, the uncertainty of what would come next. He sat on a stone bench, his fingers lightly brushing the petals of one of the glowing flowers. It was quiet, and for the first time in a long while, Elliot felt at peace. But that peace was short-lived. Human. The voice came from behind him, calm and quiet, but with an unmistakable authority. Elliot didn't need to turn around to know who it was. He had heard that voice enough times now to recognize it instantly. "Vena!" He stood up quickly, brushing the dirt off his pants as he turned to face her. She was standing there, as composed and graceful as ever, her figure framed by the glowing flowers. Her eyes were locked on him, and for a moment, Elliot felt like she could see right through him. "Did I interrupt your thoughts?" she asked, her tone soft but still carrying the weight of her position. Elliot smiled awkwardly, trying to mask the nervousness that suddenly gripped him. "No, not at all. I was just thinking." Vena nodded, taking a step closer. Thinking about what? Elliot hesitated for a moment. He could feel his heart racing. It was hard to explain. How could he explain that he was thinking about her? About their conversations? About the strange bond that seemed to be forming between them? But he didn't want to say anything that might make her uncomfortable, so he simply replied, "Just about everything, I suppose. About how different this place is from Earth." Vena tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. Different? How? Elliot thought for a moment. He could feel the weight of her gaze on him, but he didn't shy away. He had learned that being honest with Vena, even if it was uncomfortable, was the only way to move forward. It's quieter here. Peaceful, in a way.
I guess I'm not used to that. Back home, everything is always moving, always loud.
But here, it's like time slows down. She regarded him for a long moment before speaking again. You are not used to peace? Elliot shook his head. No, not really. I mean, we've got a lot of peace now, but it's not like this. On Earth, there's always something happening. Always someone talking, someone fighting. There's always noise. But here, everything feels calm. I think I could get used to it. Vena's expression softened ever so slightly, and Elliot could have sworn he saw a hint of something in her eyes, something like understanding. Peace is something we Zathari have learned to appreciate, she said. We have spent many years building a society that values harmony and quiet. The noise of the outside world is something we have learned to block out. Elliot couldn't help but be intrigued by her words. You don't miss it, the noise. I mean, the chaos? Vena's gaze drifted upward, her eyes scanning the stars above. At one point, I did. But now, I find peace to be more valuable than chaos. Chaos brings destruction. Peace allows growth. Elliot considered her words carefully. He knew that the Zathari had been through much in their long history. They had faced wars, internal struggles and challenges that Elliot couldn't even imagine. But despite everything, they had found a way to create a society where peace was the foundation. I can understand that, Elliot said quietly. It's hard to grow when everything around you is falling apart. Vena turned back to him, her expression thoughtful. It is not easy, but it is possible. Perhaps you humans, too, can learn to appreciate peace in the same way. There is much you could learn from us. Elliot nodded, a sense of admiration swelling in his chest. He was beginning to see Vena in a different light, not just as a leader, but as someone who had struggled and fought for the things she believed in. Someone who had sacrificed so much to build the peaceful world she now led. I think you're right, he said, his voice soft. Maybe that's something we could learn from you. How to find peace even in the midst of chaos. For the first time since their arrival, Vena's expression softened completely. There was no hardness, no authority. She was simply a woman, standing in front of him, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. There is hope for your people, human, she said softly. Perhaps you will find that peace one day. Perhaps we can help each other. Elliot smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. He didn't know what the future held, or what would come of the connection that was slowly forming between him and Vena. But in that moment, he felt like maybe, just maybe, there was hope for both of their peoples. Hope for something better, something more peaceful. As they stood there, side by side, the soft glow of the alien garden bathed them in its light. And for the first time in his life, Elliot felt like he wasn't alone in the universe. He had found something, or someone, who understood. And that, he realized, was the beginning of something extraordinary. The days that followed were filled with a growing sense of anticipation. Elliot could feel the subtle change in the air. The small, quiet moments that he had shared with Vena were growing, becoming more frequent. Every time they spoke, there was less distance between them, less formality. Elliot had always known that making peace between their two peoples wouldn't be easy. But now, it seemed like something more was at play. It wasn't just about diplomacy anymore. Something personal, something deeper had started to form. Vena, for all her poise and authority, had started to reveal more of herself. She was still the leader of the Zathari people, still bound by the responsibility of her position. But when they spoke, when their eyes met across the room, there was an unspoken understanding between them. She no longer viewed him as just a human diplomat. She saw him as an individual, as someone who cared about what she had built and what her people had struggled for. And Elliot found himself seeing her in a new light. She was not just an alien leader. She was a woman who had sacrificed much to keep her people safe, to build a society of peace after years of hardship. It was on one of these quiet evenings that Vena invited Elliot to join her on a walk through the Zathari Gardens. The Zathari Gardens were unlike any place on Earth. The air was filled with the scent of strange flowers that glowed faintly under the moonlight, and the paths were lined with trees that seemed to whisper in the wind. The atmosphere was calm, peaceful, just as Vena had said. And as they walked together, Elliot found that the peace of the garden seemed to settle into his chest. "Tell me more about your world," Vena said as they walked, her voice soft but steady. "What is it like there, on Earth?" Elliot thought for a moment before responding. "It's complicated. There's a lot of beauty, a lot of chaos. We're constantly moving, trying to make things better, but sometimes it feels like we're just spinning in circles. We've made a lot of progress in some areas, science, technology, medicine, but in other ways, we're still struggling. There's poverty, war, environmental destruction. Sometimes it feels like we're losing the fight to save our world." Vena listened intently, her expression thoughtful.
"And yet, you continue to fight."
"That is admirable. It shows strength." Elliot smiled at the compliment, but couldn't shake the feeling that Vena saw something in humanity that he didn't. "We fight because we have no other choice. There are moments when we feel hopeless, when we feel like we can't go on. But then there's always something, someone, who keeps us going. A moment of kindness, a spark of hope."
"That is the essence of what makes you human," Vena said, her voice softer now. "Despite everything, you keep moving forward. You never give up."
"Perhaps that is what you will need to learn from us. Not just peace, but resilience." Elliot looked at her, sensing the truth in her words. He had never thought about it that way before. He had always seen his people's strength in terms of their ability to fight and survive, but maybe Vena was right. There was another kind of strength, the ability to keep going, to find hope even when the world seemed to be falling apart. As they continued their walk through the garden, Elliot couldn't help but notice how different everything felt now. The world was still foreign to him, still filled with mysteries he didn't fully understand, but there was a new sense of belonging. He had never imagined that he would feel at home in this place, but with Vena beside him, it didn't feel so strange anymore. There was a connection between them that went beyond the political and the diplomatic. It was something more personal, more real. Vena stopped in front of a particularly beautiful flower, its petals glowing with an otherworldly light. She reached out and gently touched one of the petals, her fingers brushing against it with a reverence that Elliot hadn't expected. "This flower," she said quietly, "is called the Olores. It blooms only once every 10 years. When it does, it symbolizes a new beginning, a chance for change." Elliot stepped closer, studying the flower. "A symbol of hope, then?"
"Yes," Vina said, her voice filled with quiet conviction.
"Hope for the future, for a better tomorrow." Elliot felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He had never thought about hope in such a tangible way, but as he looked at the glowing flower, he understood what Vena meant. Hope wasn't just something to talk about. It was something you could touch, something you could see. And it was something that they both needed. "I think I'm starting to understand," Elliot said, his voice low but steady. "It's not just about surviving. It's about what you do with the time you have, about the choices you make. Even in the face of everything that's going wrong, you still have a choice to keep going, to keep hoping." Vina nodded slowly, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. Exactly. And that is the strength of your people. You may not have all the answers, but you still find a way forward. That is why I believe that there is hope for humanity." For a moment, they stood in silence, the soft glow of the olores flower casting a warm light around them. The sound of the wind rustling through the trees was the only noise, and Elliot felt as if the whole world had fallen away. It was just him and Vena, standing together, sharing a quiet moment of understanding. Elliot's heart was pounding in his chest. He had spent so much time trying to be the diplomat, the representative of humanity, but now, standing in front of Vena, he realized something. He wasn't just here to represent his people. He was here to learn, to grow, to connect. And in that connection, he found something he had been searching for, something he hadn't even known he needed. "Vena," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I'm glad I met you. I'm glad we're here.
I know we've got a long way to go, but I think
we can make it. Together." Vina looked at him, her eyes filled with something that Elliot couldn't quite name. It wasn't just the calm strength he had seen in her before. It was something more vulnerable, more open. "I'm glad too, Elliot," she said softly. "Perhaps together we can find a way to bring peace to both of our worlds." Elliot felt something stir in his chest, a hope he had never known before. It wasn't just about the mission anymore. It wasn't just about diplomacy or treaties or political alliances. It was about the connection they had found, about the bond that had grown between them in the quiet moments. And as he looked at Vena, standing before him with the light of the Olares flower reflecting in her eyes, he realized that this was only the beginning, a new beginning, just like the flower. In the days to come, Elliot and Vena would face many challenges. There would be moments of doubt, moments of struggle. But in that moment, standing together in the Zathari garden, Elliot knew that there was a chance for peace, a chance for hope, a chance for something more. And for the first time, he believed that humanity and the Zathari could build something lasting, something beautiful.